EBSCOR, the experimental program to stimulate competitive research, is a National Science Foundation grant program. The goal of EBSCOR is to strengthen science and engineering research and education throughout the United States, and to enable states like Wyoming to be nationally competitive in these areas. EBSCOR aims to improve scientific infrastructure in Wyoming and build science, technology, engineering, and math research capacity across the state. One way Wyoming EBSCOR helps strengthen science research and education is through student programs such as the Summer Research Apprentice Program, also known as SRAP. SRAP is an intensive 6-week paid research experience for high school sophomores, juniors, and seniors aiming to attend college. It offers students a hands-on research opportunity in science labs across the University of Wyoming campus. Students work one-on-one with a faculty mentor throughout their time in the program. SRAP not only provides students with a paid internship and real research experience, but also helps prepare them for college life.
All right, guys, we're going to get started again. So up next we have Ms. Kaycee Perez from Glendale, Wyoming. She will be presenting language discrimination and its effects on juror decision making.
Well, good morning. My name is Kaycee Perez. This summer I worked in the psychology department. My mentor was Marina Nunez and my grad student was Victoria Estrada. The name of my project is Language Discrimination and its effects on juror decision making. Okay, so the social identity theory is based on group membership. So within these groups, it provides its members with self-confidence and self-esteem and a general sense of belonging. So as a result of this theory, you get the in and out groups. In groups are composed of members that have something in common. It can be race or gender or other stuff like that. The out groups, they're viewed as inferior to these groups. They can be the opposite. So, in our studies, the main questions, I did 2 studies, by the way. In study 1, we want to see if do jurors discriminate against Spanish-speaking defendants, and in study 2, do people discriminate against Spanish speakers in different contexts. And the different contexts are like hospitals, banks, like scenarios, like everyday life scenarios, basically. So for study 1, we looked at both Spanish-speaking defendants and bilingual jurors. So for the Spanish-speaking defendants, we predicted that they would have more years in prison, be considered more guilty, and have negative characteristic ratings, which I'll talk about later on. And the bilingual jurors would give fewer years in prison to the Spanish-speaking defendants, consider the Spanish speakers less guilty, and give them positive characteristic ratings. This is because they have something in common with them. They share a common language. So for study 2, we also looked at Spanish speakers and the bilingual participants. So we predicted for the Spanish speakers, they'd be rated less likely to comply with the instructions, probably because they wouldn't understand the instructions, and the bilingual participants would also identify more with the Spanish speakers and the different scenarios, and they'd be more likely to give favorable ratings to the Spanish speakers because they share a common language again. Okay, for our minor materials, we'll study 1 and study 2. For study 1, we use different case summaries. And for study 2, we use survey questions. Survey Monkey was used to create study 1, while Survey Gizmo was used to create study 2. For study 1, our participants came from the University of Texas, El Paso, Texas, and the University of Wyoming. There's a total of 430 participants, and out of those participants, 31.6% were Latino, 61.9% were Caucasian, and 5.9% were other ethnicities. And for study 2, we used Amazon Mechanical Turk website to recruit our participants, and there was 222 total, and 4.9% were Latino, 71.7% were Caucasian, and 23.1% were another ethnicity. Okay, for study 1, we asked our participants answer demographic questions such as their age, gender, race, and if they were bilingual or not. And in our case summaries, we had 2. And the participants would only see one of them. So they had a man convicted of aggravated assault, and the defendant we would testify in English or Spanish with an English translator. And the participants would have to give sentencing recommendations from 5 to 99 years and an optional fine. We used a 9-point Likert type scale, and they would rate, for instance, how intelligent, friendly, and trustworthy was, and one would be intelligent and none would be unintelligent. And we wanted to look at the language of the juror, if they spoke English, if they were bilingual in Spanish and in English, to see what effect that would have on their decision. So for study one, we found that the language of the defendant didn't impact the jurors' sentencing recommendations or the ratings that they gave them. And whether or not the juror was bilingual or monolingual, that didn't have an effect. So since there wasn't any significant data, we decided to do a second study to look at some of the, to see if language had an effect on everyday scenarios, such as the hospital settings, stuff like that. So for study two, we did a different approach. We asked them survey questions. They were also asked demographic questions. We had 4 different contents or scenarios where we looked at language and its effects. We had 4 different vignettes, and vignettes are like surveys, you just call them vignettes. And the participants would only see 1 out of 4 of these. They all had the same questions, they were just in different orders. We also looked at the language of the participant to see whether they spoke English only or if they were bilingual in Spanish and English. We used a 7-point likelihood scale, 1 being likely and 7 being not likely. These are examples of our distractor questions. We had 16 total in our surveys. They were put in the surveys to distract the participants for the questions that we really want to ask. This way we get an honest answers. This one on the left asks how likely you are to play this violent video game. Again, 1 being not likely, 7 being extremely. And the one on the right here asks how likely you are to buy this couch. Same scale. They're pretty random. Okay, this is one of our 4 scenarios. Today I'm only going to talk about 3 of them. And in this scenario, participants were asked how likely they were to work with this university student. Now we changed this one of 2 ways. So in this scenario, his parents came from California and were accountants, and he's an honor student. And in the other one, we said that his parents were from Mexico and were migrant workers. So basically what we're looking for in this scenario is see if people were able to overcome his background, see if they were migrant workers or if they were U.S. citizens, and that would have an effect on their ratings. In our first graph right here, this focuses on the student and the student's background. This darker shade right here is if his parents were from the United States, while the lighter shade if his parents were from Mexico. As you can see, there's not a significant difference there, so it didn't really impact their decision. And this graph shows the participants' language. So the darker shade is if they were not bilingual, and the lighter shade here is if they were bilingual. And again, you can see there isn't a significant difference. So in conclusion to this one, you can see that the student's background didn't have an effect on their ratings, or if the participant was bilingual or not. Okay, in this scenario, it's our ticket scenario, we changed this in 4 different ways. So it's going to be a little confusing, so I'll let you. Okay, so in this one, this woman pictured here, she got a ticket. Now, she either spoke English and got a ticket in English, spoke Spanish and got a ticket in Spanish, or spoke English and got a ticket in both languages, or spoke Spanish and had a ticket in both languages. And we want to see if the language would have an effect on the judgments they gave her. Okay, in this first graph here, this is the English ticket. Now this is the dark orange is if she spoke English, the peachy color one is she spoke Spanish. Now if the ticket was in English and the driver spoke English, you can see that she got a higher rating. Now when she spoke Spanish, you can see she got a lower rating. And there's a significant difference here. Now this can be because the woman didn't understand the ticket. That could be the bias there. And in this graph right here, it looks at the Spanish speaking. So if she spoke Spanish in this one. And this darker orange it was in English. And this peachy color was if the ticket was in both English and Spanish. Now you can see there's a significant difference here. And that could be because she would be able to understand the English and Spanish ticket better because it's in both languages. Okay, we also changed this scenario, hotel worker scenario, in 1 of 2 ways. So this right here says that this woman, she works in a hotel and she's injured. She strains her back, so she has to go to a physical therapist. Now the one that's pictured here, she speaks English, and the physical therapist gives her a pamphlet in English and explains to her all the exercises she has to do. And the participants of the survey have to rate how likely they thought she was to go through the exercises. And the other option was the woman spoke Spanish, she got a pamphlet in Spanish, and a translator explained the importance of the exercise and had to read her. This first graph here is the language that the hotel worker. So this darker shade one right here is she spoke English, and this one is that she spoke Spanish. Now you can see that there is a significant difference, and this one's kind of tricky because if you look at the second graph here, that's if they were bilingual or not. But even if the woman received the pamphlet in Spanish and she spoke Spanish, she still received a lower rating. There's a bias here, but we're not quite sure why it is. It could be because she's Hispanic and they view her as not willing to do it, or something along those lines. And you can see that if they were bilingual or not, it didn't really have an impact. So for my conclusion, some of the limitations for study 1 were that we only did 2 groups and we didn't have a Caucasian comparison group. And this is a study that used the defendant. This is a jury setting. So we might compare 3 different groups, which include a Caucasian defendant, a Hispanic defendant who spoke English, and a Hispanic defendant who only spoke Spanish, to see what effect the language barriers would have. Now in study 2, we also didn't have a Caucasian comparison group, and this could help us understand to see if there is a more liking of the Caucasians versus the Hispanics, to see if that really is existing. So those are my references. For my acknowledgments, I would like to thank Wyoming and EPSCoR for funding the program, Norena Muniz and Victoria Estrada for helping me and teaching me about my project and allowing me to use their lab, Lisa Beta for accepting me into the program for a second time, my parents for being supportive and loving, my brother Leo for introducing me to the program, fellow SRAPers and counselors for making the program fun and interesting. Any questions? Yes, Lisa?
How did you pick the distractor question? Did you just see something like, hey, that's
We just try to make them as random as possible, so when they were in the survey, people would see them and be more focused on those kind of instead of the questions that we really wanted to ask.
Did you take a survey on like what their likes and dislikes to match it up, or is
It was just completely random. And yes, Marge?
When the people were considered bilingual was that only if they were Spanish and English speaking, or could it be bilingual in any 2 languages?
Well, for our studies, we just focused on the Spanish and English, but you can go with other languages, but we just try and narrow it down. Anybody else? Nope. Okay.
Why did you try to distract them in the survey? What was the purpose of that?
Because if you don't distract them, they'll see what you're really trying to ask, and they won't answer honestly. That could have happened in our student scenario. They don't want to answer honestly because they don't want to appear to be racist. They don't want that. Anybody else?